city underneath the development agreement. As we have said we would do all along, I'll move approval. We got a motion for Mr. Weber, second for Ms. Osowski. Ms. Osowski, please.
All right. I guess I will say it, citizens, you were right, and thank you as a citizen of Grand Forks. Thank you very much. Now that the Air Force has been able to voice their position, I believe that we, as a council, need to exercise caution when making public statements. It needs to be clear that due to CFIUS policy, the Air Force could not make any statements while the case was under CFIUS review. Further, after reviewing CFIUS regulations, the Air Force is prohibited from discussing any details surrounding the case or any other case for that matter. I think it's time that the City Council look at what has been done and work together to make things right. We should consider the possibility of further federal action either by the Air Force or other federal agencies as a result of the Fufang matter.
I hope you're listening.
Can you repeat that, please?
For example, in the matter of UND, is Fufang still a resident on their campus? I guess if the answer is yes, should that residency be terminated immediately?
Yes.
I believe they should be given immediate notice to relocate their offices. As noted by the Air Force, there are significant national security concerns. And while we don't know to what extent these concerns could include Fufang's residency at UND, this could place UND in a position to where the Air Force could terminate funding and contracts or any other cooperative agreements that are in place now or potentially in the future. As for Cirrus, I know some of you have been bringing that up for the past year. During recent statements made by Cirrus representatives at our state legislature, Cirrus made it publicly known that they are operating under an approved national security agreement and therefore subject to a full CFIUS review. This indicates that there were national security concerns identified and mitigated through a national security agreement between the parties and the government. And an NSA is only put in place when there are concerns identified and it must be resolved. Any indications made by the company or certain members of the EDC indicating that there were no national security concerns when Cirrus was acquired in 2011 is patently misleading. The city and the EDC should put procedures and policies in place on foreign investment to ensure that we never put ourselves or our citizens back into a situation like this again.
Yes.
I'm finished.
Thank you, Ms. Osowski. Do we have any further comments from council members? Mr. Veen, please.
Yeah, a couple of items. I don't know where to exactly start here. The motion. I don't know if we saw that in advance. At least I don't remember seeing it. If there's something that I guess I've learned through this process, and that is sometimes to slow down and make sure we fully understand before we move to the next level. And as much as I agree with, I think, the intent of the motion, I'm going to assume it's founded in factual law. I mean, the recommendation, I would assume you've looked thoroughly at the agreement and the understanding of the agreement, and this is an avenue for us to terminate the development agreement, right?
Mr. Gaston.
Excuse me, Councilmember Veen, that's correct. It was reviewed because as we've said before, Section 8 of the development agreement had a number of conditions that needed to be satisfied. There's one specifically, it's section 8.1.10. I can go through it. I think you've got a copy of the agreement, where under certain set of circumstances where it becomes impracticable or inadvisable to construct the city infrastructure for a variety of reasons. One is institution or threat by a governmental authority with respect to the project, material adverse changes that occurred. And so we're looking at that. There may be other conditions that, as a result of the events that have occurred, that may not be able to be satisfied as well. In addition, there were representations and warranties made, I believe it's in section 10 of the development agreement, that may not be correct, that may also give rise to not only an event of termination, but an event of default. So the purpose of the motion was to allow for that review, and so that we, when we send out, we have to send out a notice that we've captured all of the potential conditions that could not be satisfied, or the representations and warranties that are incorrect.
Well, I appreciate it, because I just want to make sure we have the right motion to do it, to make sure that we're terminating the contract or the agreement in the most appropriate way that supports the citizens and the community. And the wording, the words make a difference. And I just want to make sure that they're doing exactly what we intend them to do. That's the first thing I wanted to make sure and ask a question on. The second thing is there's a lot of ramifications from terminating the agreement. We have a number of contracts that are out there. We have a number of agreements. We have consultants that are working for us. There's various fallout or impacts that need to have some level of understanding. I mean, we've committed things like ARPA funds, we've looked at loan forgiveness, we've looked at State Water Commission funding. A lot of this has to do with the financial aspects, but those are things that we have probably contracts for. I don't know if there's impacts to termination of those contracts and that with a number of the consultants. Some of the issues specifically for the wastewater treatment, we confirmed up front we were going to do those projects, but we somewhat expedited it for a couple of years, but we also changed the scope. And now all of those things are going to fall back on us, and I think we have a lot of what I'm going to say is technical work to do to follow up on that. And I don't know where or when we should do that. I look at you, Mr. Phelan, what's that step? Because, you know, as our fiduciary responsibility, we should be aware of what the impacts are. Not that I support it 100%, but there are.
So if I could call my fellow council members back up to the dais, please.
Some of the
We
consequences
need to
of this
reconvene.
action could be financial for us. And I know there's been an unreal amount of staff and city time that has gone into this too. So
Okay.
I don't know, but you can answer some of those questions. I actually have a lot more, but there should be appropriate time and place to have this discussion. Now, it was back on, the January 23rd, where we talked about having a committee of the whole meeting, maybe where we could have some discussions about these things. I think that the tone of that was more about the risks of continuing the project. Now that we're not, the discussion probably should lean toward what's the impacts of not continuing the project. How does that influence the city in so many ways?
I didn't know he was.
Again, I talked about paving of 27th Avenue North, the intersection improvements. We've tried to, I personally have tried to avoid the approvals of the infrastructure items specific to the Fufang, but not for some of the other areas. there's been a lot of arguments talked about annexation tonight. And there's been full discussion about should that or should that not, or should that be reversed. And some of our discussion tonight is going to be on some of those projects. And I think we have a lot of the technical issues that are here, and there's more that probably needs to be said. I like the idea of getting together and having that discussion about some of these more specifically. One of the issues that one of our constituents talked to me, his name was Jim Bradshaw, who was the ambassador to the Air Force Base, has described what can we do on that relationship with the Air Force Base. What is it what do we do to make sure we confirm that? I mean, I always thought that was a risk. So my list it does go on for a couple pages of items, but that's what I think we have to do. We need to concur with the motion, and then take a pause and sit back and understand the total ramifications for where we are as a community. I've also confessed I think we need to have a different, improved citizens participation process along the way that can help make things flow smoothly because there's good input and there's good information on both sides that needs to be discussed. And maybe there's a bit of healing that needs to take place. And so how do we make sure that happens as we move forward? This is the biggest issue I've ever worked on, I can tell you, the most controversial. And as many of you know, I did a lot during the flood of '97, and this has brought out some real issues that I think we got to work through. I'm trying to think, again, I go back to what would I do differently from the day one, take some time and think things through and make sure we understand what we're doing. And so I just want to bring those comments forward, and I appreciate I reached out to you a little bit today to find out when and how we might get answers to those questions. I think that's going to be critical for the community to move forward.
Mayor Bachensky and Councilmember Vian, Councilmember Vian and I had a conversation, and what I suggested is that we were planning to provide another briefing regarding the project, so we do intend to put that on the agenda. And there's several task orders that are available. So we'll come to the next committee of the whole. We'll provide updates on where we're at. Just for your general awareness, the specific projects that related to the Fufang development that served them was the raw water intake and supply, and so we've stopped that project. Number 2 was the industrial wastewater pump station and associated force main. We've stopped that project. The other part, as you mentioned, Mr. Vian, is that the wastewater treatment plant we were intending to move forward with. Obviously, this provides us some additional time to think through it. I think the largest component part of that is that we'll need less capacity than what we were designing as part of that project. So those are the 3 main things as we move forward, and we'll certainly provide a briefing on where we're at with those specific items. Later on the agenda, there's going to be infrastructure from the drinking water to the domestic sanitary sewer system, and the stormwater pond that's already constructed that will serve not only the annexation area along Highway 81, but it would also serve the Greenfield development. So those are additional discussions that we can have. And all the other matters, and what I suggested to Mr. Vian is if similar to what you've always done, and I think to your point, you submitted to us a couple pages of concerns that you had regarding the Fufang development along the way, and I think most, if not all of those, ended up in the development agreement as we move forward. And so, and I asked Mr. Vian if he'd share that list, I'd make sure that we start addressing those through our various committee of the whole meetings where we can have some work sessions and work through those variety of items. And so, as Council Member Vian and I talked about today, it is tough. And I think we should be heartened the fact that the city council never said yes to Fufang, but you did say yes to moving forward with the development agreement and doing due diligence. And the national security issue arose to a position where we could not move forward any further regarding the development agreement, but we will certainly update you on the other consequences of the development agreement.
Thank you for that. somehow, sitting here as a city council person and listening to all the comments and the hurt and the pain that's out there is painful for us too. And trying to devise the right path forward is just not easy. The question is, how do you do that and do that earnestly? And how do we move our community forward? It's a great community. We've heard it many times, but we're not perfect either. So what do we do for doing that? And that's why I wanted to start these discussions and continue them of what they can do. And in some ways, in some of these, although I've always been supportive of annexation, it's maybe a time to pause until we can talk through some of these issues, and then to continue with the follow through. I've always been supportive, and there's been a variety of reasons for that. And not that I'm against it. I'm just seriously, as we get into these in the future, looking at what's the right thing to do right now. So that's just the comments I needed to make, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Veen. Any other comments from council? All right, seeing none, we have a motion and second on the floor. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously.